Today, we're going to tackle a huge economic mystery, inspired by the book Restarting the Future. We're going to try and figure out why, with all this incredible technology we have, our modern economy just feels, well, a little bit broken.
You've probably felt it, right? That sense that something is just off. Technology seems to be moving at light speed, but for a lot of people, real progress feels like it's completely stalled out. So today, let's get to the bottom of that feeling and see if we can find out what's really going on.
All right, so let's approach this like detectives at the scene of a crime. The first thing we need to do is look around and take stock of the situation. What are the symptoms? What exactly has gone wrong with the future we were all promised?
Well, when you start looking for clues, four really strange paradoxes pop up. First, there's stagnation. We have these amazing supercomputers in our pockets, but actual economic growth is crawling along. Then there's inequality. And it's not just about the gap between rich and poor anymore, it's this growing inequality of esteem and status, which some people think is connected to rising deaths of despair. Third, you have this bizarre situation with competition. The economic data shows fewer new companies and more powerful monopolies, but our own lives feel like this non-stop high-stakes rat race. And finally, fragility. We built this incredible globalized world to make us all stronger, but it seems like it's actually made us more vulnerable to every little shock, whether it's a virus from halfway around the world or a ship getting stuck in a canal.
And this stagnation isn't just some abstract number, it has a massive real-world cost. Because of the sluggish growth, people in wealthy countries are, on average, earning about 25% less than they would have if the economic trends from the end of the 20th century had just continued. Think about that. That is a huge gap between the future we expected and the one we actually got.
Let's just zoom in on that competition paradox for a second, because it is so weird. On one hand, you have all the data saying markets are less dynamic, there are fewer startups, and big firms are dominating. But on the other hand, what does your life feel like? It feels like the competition for good jobs starts practically in preschool. It's that meritocracy trap. Even being unemployed is more stressful, with all these hoops to jump through. So you have this puzzle. Less real competition for corporations, but way more intense competition for individuals.
So if those are the clues, who or what is the culprit? Well, the core argument in Restarting the Future is that all of these strange paradoxes point back to one single, massive change in our economy. The incredible shift from a world built on physical things to one that's now dominated by intangible things.
You see, for most of history, economies ran on what we call tangible capital. We're talking about factories, machines, trucks, office buildings, basically all the physical stuff you can actually reach out and touch. These things were the engine of the entire 20th century economy. But today, the most valuable things a company can own are increasingly intangible. This is the stuff you can't touch. It's the software that runs your phone, the years of research and development behind a new drug, the brand value of a company like Nike, or even the original script for a hit TV show. This non-physical stuff has become the main driver of value in our world. And here's why that matters so much. Intangible assets just don't follow the same rules as physical ones. A car factory can only build so many cars in one location. But a piece of software? You can copy it and sell it to millions of people for almost zero extra cost. That's called scalability. And intangible ideas have what are called spillovers. The new ideas from one company inevitably leak out and help its competitors. That's actually great for society as a whole, but it makes it pretty tricky for the company that made the first investment.
Okay, so if the rise of intangibles is our culprit, then what's the motive? Why did this big shift cause so many problems? Well, the argument is that the problem isn't the intangibles themselves. The problem is that we are trying to run this new, high-speed, intangible economy on an old, clunky operating system, a set of rules and institutions that were designed for the physical world of the past.
And that brings us to this really powerful idea called institutional debt. It's a lot like technical debt in the software world, where you build something new on top of old, creaky code. For a while, it kind of works. You just keep patching it. But eventually, the cost of all those patches and workarounds becomes totally overwhelming. We've been racking up a huge amount of institutional debt, and all those paradoxes we talked about, those are the signs that the bill is finally coming due.
There's a great historical example with lighthouses that makes this crystal clear. Back in the 1800s, Britain had this system of private lighthouses that actually worked pretty well for the time. But then France came along and developed a much better public system using brand new lens technology. Suddenly, France's coasts were way safer, but Britain's old private system, the good institution, completely failed to adapt for decades. An institution that worked perfectly for one era became a huge, dangerous roadblock in the next. That's institutional debt right there.
So here's the core of the mismatch. Because intangible ideas naturally spill over, our old intellectual property laws, which were designed for an age of cars, just aren't cutting it. We need things like more public funding for R&D. Because investing in an idea is a sunk cost, you can't just sell it off if it fails. Our banking system, which is obsessed with physical collateral, doesn't know how to fund it. And because the best ideas come from the synergy of people bumping into each other, our old-fashioned local planning rules are getting in the way of building the dense, dynamic cities where that can actually happen.
Okay, so we've got our culprit, the intangible revolution, and we have our motive, our outdated institutions. We understand the problem is this massive institutional debt. So what's the next step? How do we crack this case for good and actually restart the future? The book argues we need to get serious about paying down this debt in 4 huge areas. We have to reform our financial systems, completely rethink what competition means, reinvent our cities for a new era, and, this is a big one, rebuild the ability of the state to actually manage this new kind of economy.
Let's talk finance first. For decades, this famous quote from Milton Friedman was basically the rule book. The whole point of a company was just to make as much money as possible for its shareholders. Simple. But that model was really built for a much simpler, more tangible world.
And because of that old mindset, our entire financial system is mismatched. A bank loves to give you a loan for a factory because, hey, if you default, they can just take the factory. But they get really nervous about lending you money for a big R&D project. What are they going to repossess? A half-finished idea? Our tax system is even biased this way, which hurts the very intangible-heavy businesses we need to grow. Now, what about competition? When we see a giant tech company, our first instinct is to yell, break them up, like we did with the old oil barons. But in an economy where intangible things like networks and data are so important, just breaking things up might not even work. A better weapon might be to focus on making it easier for a constant stream of new, innovative companies to challenge the giants. The goal should shift from just punishing bigness to actively promoting dynamism. And what about our cities, these great hubs of ideas? The pandemic forced this massive global experiment in remote work. And let's be honest, the genie is not going back in the bottle. In the tech and information sectors, about half of all companies are planning to keep remote work as a permanent feature. That is a gigantic shift. It's probably not the death of the city, but it means we absolutely have to reinvent how cities work, from housing and transportation to what the downtown core is even for. But here's the real roadblock. Fixing all of this isn't just about coming up with clever new policies. It is a political fight. There's this concept that small, powerful groups who are benefiting from the broken old system are usually much better organized than the huge majority of us who would benefit from changing it. So, overcoming institutional debt isn't just a technical problem. It means forging new political alliances and being willing to make some tough bargains.
Ultimately, this is the main takeaway. The economic weirdness we're all feeling isn't some act of nature. It's a direct consequence of our failure to adapt. If we want a better future, one with more growth and more fairness, it's going to take a real, conscious effort to rebuild and refresh the fundamental rules of our economy for the world we actually live in now.
And that really leaves us with the final question, doesn't it? The institutions we inherited were designed for an economy of factories and machines. But we now live in an economy of ideas, data, and software. The challenge ahead is enormous, but the choice is up to us. Are we brave enough to do the hard work of building the institutions that the 21st century really needs?